The edge of the Veil Nebula was silent. As always, a curtain of color and stardust where light bent strangely, and ships often disappeared from scanners. It was a place no one stayed for long, even in peacetime. Yet on this day, the silence was broken by a ripple in space. A warp signature bloomed for a fraction of a second and then vanished, leaving only questions behind. Deep within the command deck of the Sovereign Talon, its Fleet Commander Viharan stood still, staring at the flickering data on the screen. A ship had entered Cathari space without permission. Unknown class, unknown purpose, possibly human. Heron narrowed his eyes. Humans were a new species in the galactic fold, not yet part of any great alliance. They had no known territory near the Veil. What could one of their ships be doing here? Within moments, orders were given. A patrol fleet of 37 vessels, from sleek scouts to heavy cruisers, shifted course and made their way toward the origin of the warp signature. The Cathari were a proud and ancient empire. For centuries, they had patrolled their borders without fear. Their fleets were symbols of discipline and strength, and trespassers, no matter how small, were dealt with swiftly.
At the fleet.
Expected this mission to be routine, perhaps a smuggler trying to hide, perhaps a damaged vessel lost in the nebula, or as a few muttered quietly, perhaps it was human, those unpredictable beings from the spiral arm who talked peace but built war machines behind closed doors. Still, most assumed the intruder would flee once it saw them coming. But as the Cathari ships approached the coordinates, something unusual happened. The sensors began to act strangely. At first, it was just a fluctuation, a power reading. That didn't match any known signature. Then the static grew stronger. Pulses of energy, faint but steady, rippled through the nebula like a distant heartbeat. Vessels across the formation began reporting sensor echoes, like shadows that moved just out of range. Still, no response came from the intruder. It didn't flee. It didn't even try to hide. It was waiting. Fleet Commander Viharan stepped closer. To the main display. "Zoom in," he said calmly. The screen sharpened, bringing the vessel into view. It was still distant, but something about its presence felt unnatural. There were no signal beacons, no ID codes, and no visible engine glow. Just a dark, massive silhouette floating in the mist of the veil like a silent monolith. One of the bridge officers frowned and whispered, "Sir, it's not broadcasting any distress." No response to hails. "It's just holding position." Viharan's long, clawed fingers tapped the edge of his command chair. Ships didn't act like this. Not in a place like this. The closer they got, the less sense things made. The object's size fluctuated on readings. Sometimes it seemed like a cruiser, sometimes the size of a dreadnought. Its surface reflected almost nothing, as if it were designed to vanish in the dark. Still, they could now confirm one thing. It was a ship, and it was unlike anything they had seen before. No weapons were visible, no engines, no markings, unmoving, unbothered, untouched by the swirling clouds of the nebula. Whispers began to spread among the fleet. It doesn't match any model in the database. Could it be a ghost ship? Maybe it's abandoned? No. It's watching us. Commander Viharan silenced the murmurs with a single gesture, but even he could not ignore the unease settling over. The crew? The Cathari were trained for battle, not fear. Yet, this encounter was quickly unraveling that confidence. Every second stretched longer than the last. The ship, still silent, had not moved an inch, yet the entire fleet felt as if it were. Being watched, then, the ship did something unexpected. A low-frequency pulse echoed through space, not loud, not aggressive, just enough to make every sensor in the fleet blink red for a heartbeat. It was not a weapon, but it was a warning. The Cathari fleet paused, waiting for orders. Commander Viharan considered his options. Firing first would be a declaration of war, especially if this truly was human. And if this ship had technology unknown to the case, sure, the risk was great. He gave the command to hold position. 37 ships, armed and ready, frozen. In space, facing a vessel that hadn't even raised a shield. And still, the ship waited. Far across the stars, back in Cathari Central Command, advisors debated the meaning of the appearance. But here, in the dark near the Veil Nebula, all that mattered was the unspoken truth settling in every heart aboard the fleet. This was not a lost freighter. This was not a mistake. This was a message. The message was clear. Someone had arrived who was not afraid. Inside the command bridge of the Sovereign Talon, Fleet Commander Viharin stood tall, his gaze fixed on the central display that now showed the distant outline of the mysterious vessel. Around him, crew members moved quickly between consoles, analyzing data, boosting signal strength, and preparing for what they all assumed would be a quick show of dominance. The Cathari were known across the stars for their strict military protocols, and Viharin believed in them without question. When a foreign vessel entered their space, especially one that refused to respond or retreat, the next step was clear: initiate the first contact intimidation sequence. It was designed not for diplomacy, but for control. The fleet activated its communication systems and broadcasted a sharp, formal message across all frequencies, a demand for identification, immediate power down of weapons, and full surrender. The words were forceful, delivered in the traditional Cathari tongue, translated into standard galactic, and backed by a display of power as several warships lit their primary weapons in a synchronized flash, casting long shadows across the dark clouds of the Veil Nebula. But the vessel ahead remained silent. No signals, no movement, no return hail. Just stillness, as if the ship didn't even notice them, or worse, didn't care. A second hail was sent, this time with tighter encryption and a more direct tone. Still nothing. Tension in the command deck rose. Viharin clenched his jaw and ordered a sensor sweep at maximum range, demanding a clearer visual. As the data came in, the crew fell silent. One of the officers, young and usually composed, let out a quiet gasp that echoed in the stillness of the bridge. The image on the view screen shifted and sharpened. It was not a frigate, as they'd first assumed. Nor was it a cruiser, transport, or anything remotely familiar. The ship was massive, not just in scale, but in presence. Its black surface was unnaturally smooth, almost like polished stone, and it reflected none of the nebula's ambient light. There were no windows, no visible weapons, no exhaust trails, and no beacon lights. It simply existed, anchored in space like a monument to something ancient and forgotten. And on its hull, only one marking could be seen, a deep crimson symbol, etched into the black, Un's Nemesis Prime. That was the moment the ship spoke. Not with force, not with volume, just a simple message broadcasted on open frequency, clear and composed. A human voice, calm and unmistakable, said, "Stand clear. Yes. This zone is now under human protection. Nothing more. No explanation. No threat. Just a line spoken with such quiet confidence that it unsettled even the most hardened officers. For a moment, no one on the Sovereign Talon moved. The silence that followed was heavier than the emptiness of space itself. Viharin turned slowly toward his communications officer. "Is that confirmed?" The officer nodded, his expression uncertain. Human voice. Standard dialect broadcast on all channels. It didn't respond to our encryption, just replied on open frequency. Another officer whispered, "They don't sound afraid." Viharin's eyes narrowed. Humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, barely recognized as a major power. Yet here one of their ships was not fleeing, not answering to warnings, but making a declaration. And doing it with no escort, no show of weapons, and no fear. The commander gave an order, a full magnified scan of the vessel, no matter how much power it took. The ship's surface remained unreadable. The material used was beyond any known classification. Energy signatures pulsed slowly like a heartbeat but did not match known propulsion or weapon systems. The more they scanned, the less they understood. Some systems began to glitch, as if the ship's very presence was interfering with nearby technology. And yet it did not attack. It didn't need to. The message had been clear. This was human space now, not by conquest, but by declaration. Viharion had fought in 7 border skirmishes and commanded fleets against pirate lords and rogue AI warships. Never before had he felt unsure of his next move, but now, staring at a ship that revealed nothing yet demanded everything, he hesitated. The crew, sensing his pause, said nothing. Their silence was not out of fear of discipline, but because they too were trying to understand. Who would send a ship like this? Why here? Why now? And what did they mean by under-human protection? The words echoed again in Viharion's mind. He had read intelligence reports about human military strategies, bold, unorthodox, and sometimes brutal, but none had ever mentioned a ship like this. Could it be a prototype, psychological weapon, or was it something more? For the first time, Viharion considered a possibility that unsettled him deeply, that this ship wasn't sent to start a fight, but to end one before it ever began. That thought stayed with him as he stared into the view screen where the silent vessel remained unmoving, its shadow stretching across the stars like a line drawn in the dust of war. He didn't know yet what the humans wanted, but he knew this much: the game had changed. The Cathari fleet drifted slowly into the pale orbit of a dying dwarf star, its light dim and flickering like the last glow of a forgotten lantern. The energy of the star pulsed weakly, casting long shadows through the thick clouds of the Veil Nebula, and within that dim curtain, the human ship hovered, still, silent, and massive. It was now fully visible, and what the Cathari saw sent a quiet chill through every ship. The vessel, known only by its markings, Un's Nemesis Prime, was nothing like they had expected. It was not sleek or elegant like Cathari warships, nor bulky and crude like old pirate cruisers. It was something else entirely. Its hull was smooth and black like deep space itself, with no windows, no ports, and no visible weapons. Were no lights on its surface, only a single glowing insignia in crimson, etched so deep into the armor it seemed part of the ship's bones. It didn't shimmer or blink. It just glowed steadily, calmly, like a warning written in fire. With all their advanced sensors, the Cathari could not determine how the ship moved or how it was powered. It gave off no heat signature, no engine trail, no radiation, as if it had simply appeared out of nothing and decided to remain. And what made it worse was its size. The Nemesis Prime was not just larger than a battleship, it was larger than their entire central command vessel. It stretched across the void like a piece of the void itself, making every other ship look like a toy in its shadow. And yet, it did not move. It did not fire. It just waited, as if confident there was no reason to act because it had already won, inside the sovereign talon. Fleet Commander Viharion remained quiet, his eyes fixed on the image hovering in the center of the bridge. Around him, his officers were no longer speaking boldly. The bravado had faded. Instead, soft whispers passed between the crew. Not orders, not strategies, but questions, doubts, and stories. One young officer leaned toward another and said in a low voice, "They say Earth once built weapons so powerful they erased entire moons, but they promised never to use them." Another added, "What if this is one of those weapons?" Reborn, Viharion heard them, but did not speak. He had led fleets across many sectors, had faced rebellions, hunted smugglers, and once stared down a rogue AI destroyer. But never had he felt what he now felt: uncertainty. He tapped the console and reviewed the intelligence logs again. No ship named Nemesis Prime had ever been reported by any known source. No design files, no sightings, no rumors. And yet here it was, unmistakably real and overwhelmingly present. That kind of silence in the records didn't happen by chance. It meant someone had made sure this ship remained hidden and only revealed now, for a reason. The fleet received new orders from Central Command. Observe, but do not engage. A rare directive for the Cathari, who were trained to act, not wait. Viharion understood why. The council back home was watching through long-range scans and no doubt feeling the same sense of unease. Some of the more cautious voices in the government would be wondering, had humanity ever shown the full extent of its strength? Or had it been hiding, learning, preparing? Viharion remembered the first time humans appeared on the galactic stage, loud, curious, and seemingly fragile. Their ships were fast but small. Their tech was clever but inconsistent. Most saw them as a minor race with big dreams. But now, as the Nemesis Prime drifted slowly across the dim light of the dying star, that image cracked apart like old glass. The truth might have always been there that humans were never weak, only patient. Impatience, when paired with vision, became something far more dangerous. Across the fleet, the officers adjusted their weapon systems but kept them cold. No one wanted to be the one to fire first. Not here, not now. Because if that ship truly was what it seemed, not just a warship, but a ghost of power too vast to measure, then provoking it might not just bring battle, it could bring erasure. One junior officer, barely out of academy, turned to his superior and asked, "Sir, if the humans could build something like that without us ever knowing, what else have they built that we still don't see?" The older officer didn't reply. He didn't need to. The silence of space had already answered. Viharin finally stepped back from the display. He gave no speech, no command of strength, just a quiet order, hold position. The words rippled through the fleet like a quiet wave. And for the first time in Cathari military history, an entire battle group froze, not in fear of orders, but in awe of possibility. Deep within the silent command deck of UNS Nemesis Prime, Captain Alara Vance stood with hands behind her. Back eyes fixed on the holographic projection of the Cathari fleet that hovered like tiny sparks around her ship. She wasn't tense, she wasn't worried. Her breathing was steady, her gaze sharp, and her tone calm as she addressed her AI co-pilot, a smooth voice known simply as Rain. "No sudden moves." "At," she said softly. "They're already hearing us." "At." Around her, the walls of the ship hummed, with low vibrations, not noise in the traditional sense, but waves of controlled gravitational pulses. Invisible to the eye, subtle to the ear, but powerful enough to make entire warships on the outside feel as though something ancient and unseen was passing through them. It wasn't a weapon. It was a presence, a whisper of potential force. Nemesis Prime had never been designed to fire first. It had been designed to appear, to exist, and in doing so, end conflicts before they could begin. A single look at the ship was meant to trigger hesitation, and hesitation led to diplomacy. It was the ultimate deterrent, not through destruction, but through doubt. Alara had trained for years for this moment, not to give speeches or press launch buttons, but to stand still in the storm and let silence speak louder than missiles. She watched quietly as the Cathari ships shifted in formation, still unwilling to engage, still scanning for something they couldn't comprehend. Then came a soft ping on her console. RAYN reported calmly. Additional units have emerged. Pattern complete. Across the galaxy, in other sectors of the Cathari Dominion. Similar human vessels were now decloaking, all bearing the same design, the same silence, the same presence. 13 Nemesis-class warships, each previously hidden in deep stealth, now revealed themselves within light seconds of major Cathari outposts. None of them moved aggressively. None of them transmitted threats. They simply appeared, and that alone sent a ripple across the stars. Back aboard the Sovereign Talon, Commander Viharin received the report in stunned silence. Data streams poured. Into his screen, massive unidentified ships detected near their key stations, all bearing the same crimson insignia. No known registry, no open records. It wasn't a trick or a drill. Humanity had deployed its true fleet, not the one the galaxy knew from trade routes or border patrols, but the one it had hidden in the quiet places between stars, preparing for a time when it would not ask for a seat at the table, but take one without raising a voice. The Dominion Council, faced with this sudden reality, reacted quickly. Urgent directives were sent to all commanders near the human borders. The message was short and clear: stand down, do not engage. Withdraw to safe distance. Viharin read the words twice, unable to believe them at first. The Dominion, known for its pride, had just issued a full retreat, not after battle, but after seeing something they could neither explain nor challenge. On the Nemesis Prime, Captain Vance nodded slightly as Rain confirmed the Cathari fleet had begun to pull back. "They've understood," she said, not with arrogance, but with a quiet recognition of the moment. This wasn't a victory in the traditional sense. There was no battle, no damage, no bodies lost. It was something more elegant, more controlled. Power without noise. The galaxy had always measured strength by firepower and scars. But humans, in their long years of silence, had built something else. Something that did not need to shout to be heard. As Nemesis Prime continued to hover near the dying star, its black hole absorbing the faint light, Captain Vance turned her attention back to the fleet map. More signals appeared, ships from other civilizations, watching carefully. Uncertain whether to view the humans as conquerors or guardians, and that was exactly the space humanity had chosen to occupy. Not rulers, not rebels, but protectors with a shadow long enough to keep others thinking twice. "We've changed the conversation," Vance said quietly to no one in particular. And across the void, in silent command decks and high council chambers, leaders of powerful empires were beginning to agree. The humans had not fired a shot. But their message was clear.